Okay, this little tutorial links with the very first lesson of the Applied Geographical Skills topic, which is sometimes known as the map skills. And what I'm going to do today is I'm actually going to start by showing you what this type of question looks like in an exam context. And then that will make some of the material on the first page of your actual assignment, this material, a lot more easy to understand. Now, you'll find that I have in your assignment given you access to, or shared with you, a PDF of the 2019 exam paper. And that's what I'm going to start by looking at with you to explore what this exam question looks like. Okay, first of all, this particular topic appears in paper 2. So in front of you right now is what we call paper 1, the Geography, Physical, Human Environments paper. So I'm going to very quickly scroll through that, and if you've opened up your own copy, you can do that as well. And I'm going to show you what paper 2 looks like. Okay, so let me just scroll to paper 2. There we are. And paper 2 is called Geography, Global Issues, and Geographical Skills. Okay, so the global issues, in the year 2021, you're only going to be required to do one of those. Whereas any other year beyond that, you would be looking to answer 2 of these global issues. And in the geography department, the 2 we normally focus on are development and health and global issues, with the exception of the year 2021, where we're just going to be looking at climate change. And there are 40 marks, or in 2021, there'll be 20 marks for the one global issue that you answer. Okay, in section 2, this is what this whole unit is about. It's helping you tackle this 20-mark exam question on applied geographical skills. This is a really fascinating area of geography. It's called application of geographical skills because the idea is you're meant to use your knowledge and your ability to read maps and look at information to make decisions. You can never predict what map you're going to get or what actual skills you're going to have to rely on. And that's why we're going to develop all the skills to allow you to access any possible or answer any possible type of question. So what I'd like to do is just scroll through section 1, because that's the global issues, which this unit is not focusing on, and bring you to the question here, section 2, application of geographic skills, 20 marks. It'll be always question 5. And typically these questions start with what we call the brief, and that's the thing you can see in front of you. Now, in this particular year, 2019, the main idea was about whether the students thought that a new runway should be built at Heathrow Airport. And the brief is very important, and later on in lessons to come, I'll talk more about the importance of the brief and paying close attention to what the brief instructs you. Okay. The question will also ask you to always to look at not just the map, so study the Ordnance Survey map, and of course you will always get an Ordnance Survey map with this exam paper, and it will always be used to answer question 5. But you'll also be asked to look at a range of other sources, what we call the diagrams. And in this case, there are 4 of them. Now, before we have a look at those questions, let's just have a look at the diagrams and the map. So there would be diagram Q5A. That's almost always the first diagram you see is what we call a map insert that gives you the wider location of your development and the surrounding area. Diagram 5B is a line graph. Diagram 5C is another line graph, and diagram 5D is a photograph. And that's fairly common that you'll also get a photograph and a graph as sources. Now, the purpose of all of these 4 sources, these diagrams, is that you are expected to use information that you can see in them to answer one or both of the actual questions. I'll talk more about the questions in a minute. Finally, you're going to have an Ordnance Survey map, and it'll be an actual paper copy. So I'm just going to scroll to the end to show you the map. There we are. And the Ordnance Survey map will cover an area. In this case, it happens to be an area of West London. And you'll have a fairly extensive Ordnance Survey key. And today's lesson is going to really focus you in on the key at a level you've never really looked at map keys before, because actually the key itself represents a significant resource for helping you answer the question. You've got the scale down here. That's also going to be very relevant to answering questions, because the distance of things to your development, how far other things are, is going to be something you're going to want to refer to. And the use of the compass. So all Ordnance Survey maps are organized with a north orientation, and you might be talking about something being north of your development or south of your development. Okay, so you've got an Ordnance Survey map, and you've got 4 diagrams and what we call the exam brief. That's this thing here again. Let's have a look at the 2 questions. Now, if you look through all the past papers available, the 2 questions are extremely similar every year. The first question will always ask you about the advantages and disadvantages of a proposed site. And that is a proposed site for a development. In this time, it's a runway for an airport. It could be a housing development, a supermarket development, or there are some questions which ask you about a route. So it could be like a new road being built or a new running track, for example. So, but they're always something that's going to be developed. And you have to use all of the sources as well as your Ordnance Survey map to answer that question. The second question is always about the impacts of the development. Okay, so can you see the word there, impacts? So you've got to think, in this case, they're building a brand new, or they're thinking of building a brand new runway on a Heathrow. You've got to think about the site they're choosing to build. Is that a good site or is that a bad site? And you've got to use map evidence. And then you've got to think about, if they go ahead and build it, how would that impact on people? That's social, businesses, that's economic, and the environment. I think that's fairly straightforward what that word means. Okay, and in total, there you go, 20 marks. And kind of a first bit of advice is, a lot of people think that part A would be 10 marks, part B would be 10 marks. Well, it doesn't have to be. You could write 14 marks for part A and 6 marks for part B and still get your 20 marks. Now, sometimes they will actually say part A is worth 10, part B is worth 10. And in that case, you have to write 10 marked points for each of them. But if you see this, if it's an overall mark for both parts, then you're not beholden to have to do 10 and 10. Okay, that's an introduction. That shows you what the exam question looks like. What I'd now like to do is on with the lesson. So to do today's lesson, you're going to have to open up your assignment if you've not done so already. And the first bit here, this first paragraph, you can just have a quick read of it at your own leisure, but it just summarizes what I have just talked about. And I've shown you an example of one of these. And it really does encourage you to think on your feet, okay? Because you don't know what the development you're going to be asked about is, and you don't know where in the United Kingdom you're going to be asked to do it. But your answer must be entirely based on the material you're given by the exam board. You will be using your compass directions in your answer. You'll be definitely using a lot of 6-figure grid references, and occasionally you might be using a 4-figure grid references. There will be reasons to maybe use them, but I would always encourage 6-figure grid references. You'll be needing to give extensive knowledge of map symbols, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. You'll be talking about the distance between things, or how far or near things are that are relevant to the development. And you're going to be discussing the surrounding area using evidence. You're finally going to, and we'll talk about that today, talk a lot about the relief of the site. That is to do with the height and shape, and that will rely on you using ideas of contours. And any physical features you might have at your site, like cliffs or waterfalls that are present, and evidence is normally on the map for them, and the aspect of your site. Now, that's the direction it's facing. And that's relevant because obviously south-facing sites always face the sun all day long. North-facing sites never see the sun because they're always in the shadow because the sun never shines from the north. And in some developments, that might be a relevant point. If the aspect of your development is north-facing slope, that might be a problem. Right. There's another little bit of reading. I've just outlined this. There's the scenario, what I call the exam brief. Okay. And then there is the 2 questions. And that is kind of a highlight of what the 2 questions always are every year. Okay, let's get on to the main task. What we're going to do today is think a little bit about map symbols and start looking at an actual map and thinking about a development. Okay, so you'll be doing a bit of work in a couple of minutes' time. Right, on an Ordnance Survey map, you'll be asked to use your grid reference skills, and you'll look at an area and you'll just use the most common symbols that you're familiar with. At the higher level, you're going to want to really explore the map symbols in the area that you're being asked to consider on your Ordnance Survey map. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. And therefore, your familiarity with the map symbols of an Ordnance Survey map is really useful. Now, I've got this spider diagram that I've put together, which outlines kind of some of the major symbol groupings, and I'll show you in a second an example of them. But roads form one grouping, railways, land features, abbreviations, tourist info, water features, height, rock features, public rights of way, and boundaries. And surrounding each of these map symbols are how these map symbols might be relevant to answering a question. So, for example, when you think about height and slope of the land, will a high area of land with a steep slope be suitable for building something on? If it's high land, will it be colder? Is the weather colder higher? Well, yes, it is. If there's a river nearby, will that create a flooding issue for your development? Okay, so that's what I mean by using symbols to make decisions. Now, in your assignment, you should find a higher 2017 OS map, and I'd like you just to open that, or if not, then follow my video. But you can look at the symbols of this map in a lot more detail yourself. So let's just have a little look at this. So here's a typical map. This was from the 2017 exam. And what we can see is a couple of big towns on our map. And we've got a fairly flat landscape. We've got a river coming through our map, and we've got an area of sea. Half of our map is actually taken up with Ordnance Survey symbols. So let me just zoom in and show you the symbols, because that's what we're really focusing in on in today's lesson. Okay. I was just taking a bit of time to clear up the view. There we go. Right. Now, there are a lot of map symbols, and we pay attention or pay very little attention to an awful lot of them. And you can see those groupings I was just talking about. There are the roads and paths. So, for example, a blue, that's a motorway. That's the widest possible road. That's where cars can travel at the fastest, and these roads can carry lots of cars. A roads are the second largest roads we have in the UK. Now, if they're green, they tend to be primary routes, and they might be dual carriageway, so that cars can travel in either direction in their own lanes. If they're red, then they are main roads. Also, they're A roads, but they're often not quite as wide. Once you get to orange roads and then the narrowest, yellow roads, these are small back roads, country roads. And in the case of yellow ones, they're very narrow and they might not even be properly paved. So their capacity to carry lots of traffic is going to be limited. Okay. Then we've got railway lines, railway cuttings, that's a symbol there. We've got stations on railway lines, level crossings, that's where roads are crossing railway lines. Light railway stations, so this is like trams, that would be that symbol. We've got water features, a whole range of them, marshes, little blue lines are rivers. We've got beaches, sand, widening rivers, cliffs on the edge of coasts. You're familiar with a lot of these features from National 5. Contours, National 5 will have developed your skill to consider contours and their implication. Then there's lots of other symbols like the height of the land, rock features, cliff features, scree slopes. Then we've got footpaths, bridleways, that's for horse riding, cycle routes, that's the blue green dots, other routes for public access, areas that are danger because there might be military testing, weapons, national trails. Then we've got all of these symbols here, land features. I could go on, and I don't want to, I'm just flicking through them all. There's tourist information symbols. We've got abbreviations that you see on a map, antiquities, so these are ancient features that we find in the landscape. Boundary lines, so there's a national park symbol. If you see that, that means you're in a national park. And then there's the scale. And of course, on these maps, one grid square always represents 1 kilometer. Right, let's get down to some work. Now that we've looked at the symbols, and let's start really simple. here is one grid square, okay? Now, when you are starting this question, it's always, the first question is always going to be to consider a development, okay? Now, so what I want you to do is I want you to think that they are planning on building a new development, okay? And they've given you, in the exam question, they've given you a location on the map where this is going to happen. Now, I'm just going to say that it's actually happening where the words Walsall End are written. So that's where the new development is going to occur, the area that I'm highlighting now. Now, let's just put an actual development on this. It could be anything, and actually what it is quite important, because what it is will influence what you consider is important about the site. And we'll do more of that later. But let's just, for argument's sake, say the question has said they're planning on building a set of holiday chalets. Okay, so let's just have a little look at that. Once you see what they're planning on developing, would like you to pause and actually imagine what is the development. So if it's a supermarket, you might be thinking, okay, I know what a Tesco's look like. I've been there. If it's a wind farm, you've been like, okay, I've seen them on the hillside. I know what they look like. If it's a business park, a modern business park, then you know what that looks like. So it's quite important that in your head you think closely, you stop and pause and think, right, what actually is this development? Is this a housing estate? I'm being asked. And if it's a bunch of holiday chalets like these ones, well, you're going to start thinking about various things in a different way than you might do if this was a Tesco supermarket. The site might be more appropriate for a Tesco supermarket, for example, than it might be for a bunch of holiday chalets. Okay, so let's go back to the question. You're being asked to plan a building. I've shown you where it's going to be, and I've told you it's going to be a group of holiday chalets. Let's just say 10 holiday chalets. A company's going to be building them in this location. Okay, what factors would you need to consider based on map evidence? Now, the first thing you always want to do is just focus on the grid square in which your development is happening. Everything that lies within that kilometer, or if the development's kind of across 2 grid squares, you want to think within 1 kilometer of your development. Okay, and what you actually want to start thinking about is the site itself. So here's the site. Okay, so the first factor you would always consider is what we call the relief. Okay, now the relief is the height and shape of the land. Is the height and shape of the land suitable for this type of development? Now, I'm not going to type this. This is where you're going to do a bit of work, but let's just discuss this. We are 100 meters above sea level, which is pretty low down. So therefore, the climate is likely to be warmer and therefore not be a problem. It's going to be not as cold. So whatever the development was, that might be more suitable. Now, for holiday chalets, tourist chalets, that would be appropriate because people are not likely to want to go on holiday in areas that are incredibly cold. Okay. Second thing is we're then thinking about, is this land flat? Well, we have a contour going through. So, and we have another contour here, and we have one over here. So it's not flat. It's not steep. There is quite wide spacing between these, but there is a gentle to moderate gradient from here to here. So the land is sloping in this way. So the second thing you'd want to say is, however, the land is not flat. Now, that's just a descriptive statement. You would then have to explain whether that is suitable or not. What would you need to consider? Well, flat land that's not flat is going to need to be flattened to build buildings. It always would need to be. And that means excavation and engineering, which is going to increase the costs of developing that piece of land. So the developer is going to have to absorb those costs. It's going to be more expensive. So that is something that's going to be, I suppose, a negative. Okay, so that's relief. That's the first thing you've considered. And you're going to want to type that in now. Make sure you complete it. All right, let's think about the second very important thing. And every single time you look at a map, you will start by thinking about, is the land flat or not? You're then going to always move on to what I call drainage. Okay, so what's the drainage of this location? Now, when we think about drainage, we're thinking about rivers and flood potential. Okay, now, if this site is happening here, there is a small stream to the east of this site. Now notice I'm actually using that in my language. There's a small stream to the east of the development site. Now in periods of heavy rain, that might result in flooding, which could be problematic. So that would be a negative. However, if people are coming to a holiday here, they might choose to walk next to the stream on a summer's day, or they might even choose to go paddling or swimming if the stream was deep enough. And that could be a positive in the context of this being a holiday development. Likewise, if it was a housing estate, people might like to be living next to a river because it's attractive. It's an attractive feature. So there's a positive and a negative fact of having a river. Okay, so that's the second thing on our map. Right, the third thing that you're always going to want to consider is transport. Now, at the moment, I'm only giving you one grid square, so all we can see is this small little yellow road. And we know from our symbol sheet that these are little back roads. Okay, these are narrow roads. Now, is that a problem? Is that an advantage for development happening here? Well, it's both. It depends which way you want to look at it. So when they are constructing this development, they're going to be bringing in a lot of equipment and a lot of workers to build these lodges. This narrow road might be problematic for large machinery. Okay. Also, as visitors come up and down this small road, there are buildings here, so somebody's living here. This narrow road is going to become quite congested and quite busy, which is going to generate a bit more traffic and conflict with local people. Okay. However, on the plus side, people who come to visit here are not going to want a great big motorway right behind their holiday place. So for a tourist development like holiday lodges, actually being on the end of a small road is advantageous because it's going to be much quieter. There's not going to be lots of vehicles nearby. On the downside, it might take them longer to get to the development because they're immediately or close to them there isn't a main road. Now, we can't see what lies beyond this, so we might, when we widen out on next lesson, our area that we're thinking about, we might consider what transport lies beyond the actual location. So you're going to want to explain the advantages and disadvantages that transport presents in this grid square. Okay. Factor 4 will be relevant to most developments. I always think of it as room for expansion. Right. Now, when you think about room for expansion, you've got to think about what might happen in the future. So when something is going to be built, you normally plan to build a certain thing at a certain time, and you get planning permission for that. But if it's successful, a developer might want to come back and build more. But if they haven't bought land that has got any other available land around it to build into, then they're stuck. So it really depends on your development. In the case of the London Heathrow runway expansion, that would have been one of the limitations because they were planning on building a new runway and there was the land for it, but there wouldn't be any more land for further expansion beyond that. In this case, we can see there is no development beyond these small buildings here, here, and here in the surrounding 1 square kilometer. So if they want to develop more holiday lodges in the future, well, that would be a positive. So you really have to think about your map and what your development is. Right. Our next one that you're always going to want to consider is conflicts. What are the potential conflicts of your site, of the actual site itself? Okay. So we have 2 small little footpaths leading through this site. One of them, especially right next to where the development is going to happen. So our development is going to disrupt those footpaths. Now that's going to be, would be a disadvantage because there'll be conflict between local walking groups and the developers. That footpath will be advantageous, I suppose, because people coming to the holiday resort might be able to easily go and walk along these footpaths. Let's have a look at another possible conflict. We have buildings here, so we have people living here, and I suspect this is probably a farm. I don't actually know, there is no FM symbol. But even if it's a farm or not, we've got people living here. So are they going to be in conflict with this development? More than likely. They're probably living here because it's quiet and it's in the countryside, whereas now they're going to have a brand new development right next to them. So there's a potential for conflict between the developers and local residents. However, on the plus side of this, these local people might see their property prices rise because there's now a new development nearby. So it might have a positive. Now that would largely depend. If it was a big supermarket, that might depress property prices. If it was more housing, then it would probably increase property prices. Also, if this was a farm, for example, they could be selling farm stuff that they're producing, eggs and things like that, 2 people visiting this resort, and even doing some kind of farm shop. So that could be a positive. So think about potential conflicts or benefits that might happen. You'll notice I've used everything within one grid square to consider this development here. Okay, and what we're going to do next lesson is we're going to widen out our thoughts into the broader landscape, what surrounds it, and pick up evidence that might be good or bad for the development we're considering. So make sure you've written as much detail as you can from evidence from that map into these 5 boxes, and then hand in your work.